much, and it's such a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm sorry my Portuguese is not better. I don't have a good excuse. I actually was living in Boston the last 6 years, and those of you that study immigration patterns know that Boston is the home in America to the most number of Brazilian immigrants. So many of my friends and neighbors are wonderful people from Brazil that came to America some years ago, and I still didn't learn the language, so I apologize for that. You'll have to bear with me. It's really a pleasure, Your Excellencies. Thank you for coming to this event on a beautiful Saturday morning in São Paulo. Dr. Laranjeira, of course, who organized the whole event, and his department and his entire team that's been just wonderful taking care of me during my short visit here. And I hope next time to definitely visit longer. I want to thank many of my friends from Brazil who really are ambassadors of your country around the world on this issue. Father Ram, of course, in Campinas, doing incredible work with street children, has been a friend of mine for the last 15 years. Also a sister of mine, Mina Seinfeld de Karukunjanski, the former drug czarina of Rio de Janeiro, who came to this I've known for more than a decade, doing excellent work, and I want to thank her, and I want to thank all of you from the various institutions, religious, civil, civic societies that are here today to listen to this. I want to have hopefully a short talk about marijuana because I hope we can entertain time for questions and have a debate. You know, I think this is one of the most misunderstood issues of our time, really, the issue of substance abuse and specifically of marijuana. And the reason I think marijuana is especially misunderstood is because oftentimes its effects are not seen immediately, right? Unlike cocaine or heroin, the effects sometimes take a while to settle in. Not always, but sometimes. And, you know, I was listening to the former health secretary talk about the differences of different drugs. Of course, the different substances have different effects, but I'm sure he would agree. At the end of the day, whether you're talking about marijuana addiction, cocaine, crack, heroin, alcohol, tobacco, they're all leading to the same place, right? They're all leading to a place of unfortunately, of hopelessness and despair. It may take you longer to get there if you smoke cannabis versus if you smoke crack, but they're taking you to the exact same place. And so I think in that context, we really need to think about what we can do about this drug and what we can do about really drug issues generally. The two main things I want to say before I get into the specifics of my slide, if you're only going to remember two things of today, I hope it's these two things. The first is that I don't think we have ever really lived in a time where the disconnect between the scientific understanding of drugs, and specifically marijuana, and the public misunderstanding was so large, okay? The gulf between what science knows and what the public doesn't really know is humongous, is massive. And I think in part because of a very well-funded legalization campaign from around the world that has been going on for some time. And it's a campaign that is very sophisticated, funded by billionaires. Many former presidents of many countries, including mine, are part of it. And unfortunately, they, I think, are very disconnected with the problems on the ground. They don't go to the Cracoland that I went to yesterday in Sao Paulo. They don't go and meet the street children that Father Ram works with. They don't go and talk to the treatment providers that many of you are and many of you work with. Because from an academic point of view, it sounds pretty good. Let's regulate and control drugs. Yes, we should regulate it. We can be, academic about it. The reality is our experience with regulation is not good, okay? Whether it's in Brazil or in America or in any other country. And that leads me to my second point. My second point is Brazil is world famous for its efforts against cigarettes and tobacco, and we have one of the architects of that policy here today. How ironic then would it be that as we go towards restricting one substance, which is responsible, remember, you have made tremendous progress on tobacco like we have in America, but still in America, tobacco kills 450,000 people a year, and I believe in Brazil about 120,000 people a year. Still, with every single good law and campaign, 16% of Brazilians smoke cigarettes. 25% of Americans smoke cigarettes. With all of the campaigns that are going on, what does that tell us? That tells us that when a drug is legalized, even if you have strong campaigns, when a drug is being promoted, whether very overtly or not overtly, when a drug is normalized, more people use it. That's the bottom line. Alcohol and tobacco are accepted culturally, they are legalized, and they are used far greater than any of our illegal drugs, including marijuana. So we have to think about, do we want to legalize a substance that under 3%, I believe, Dr. Laranjeira, 2% of Brazilians use, 2% marijuana. In the United States, it's 8%. Do we want to legalize that drug for everybody because of the 2% in Brazil, or the 8%? Now, if 75% of people were smoking marijuana, we might have to think about how to control that. That's a large number. But when less than 3% of people and closer to 2% in Brazil use marijuana, and in the United States less than 8%, we really have to think about, do we want to bring the levels of marijuana up to rival alcohol or tobacco? And you could say, well, we can legalize it and then have an educational campaign. Well, with tobacco, the best we can do is 16% probably. Maybe we can reduce it a little bit more. But when it's legalized, even with the best campaigns, it's normalized. Young people see it as a badge of adulthood. What do I mean, a badge of adulthood? They see it as this is an entry point to be an adult, to drink a glass, to drink beer, to drink liquor, to smoke a cigarette. Do we really want to do that for any other substance? So I ask you to think about, what has the public health impact of our legal drugs, alcohol and cigarettes? What has the public impact of alcohol and cigarettes been? And do you want to repeat that with any other substance? We happen to be talking about marijuana. We could be talking about any other substance. Do you want to repeat that with crack? Well, I mean, from what I saw yesterday, there is a little version of legalization already happening in the Crackoland area. Do we want to expand that? Do we think that that is the message that we want to send to young people? Do we think that that is a message of hope that we want to live with as a society? So those are my main messages. Now I want to go through some specific, what I call myths about marijuana. And they're all based on my book. Unfortunately, it's not translated into Portuguese, so maybe we can work on that. My book is called Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. And so today I will go through a few of those myths that I think are very important. But I want to show you first, in the United States, the percentage of users of drugs, of alcohol. This is very similar, same in Brazil. Around 50 to 60% of Brazilians and Americans drink alcohol regularly. In Brazil, you have a better number on cigarettes. It's closer to 16%. We're closer to 25%. And in marijuana, we're much more than you. We're 7 to maybe now 8%. You're closer to 2%. But the proportions are actually the same, roughly. The proportions of our legal drug users are much more than our users of marijuana and any other legal drug. So the first myth is that marijuana is harmless and non-addictive. Okay? Many people who smoke marijuana will say, it's not addictive. It's not like heroin or crack or alcohol or even cigarettes. But what they don't realize, actually, is that we have many receptors, many parts of our brain that when you smoke marijuana, it affects. Because we actually have what we call cannabinoid receptors in the brain. And that affects things like brain development, memory, motivational systems and reward, on and on and on. And so, like other drugs, actually marijuana affects many parts of the brain. Now let me tell you, tobacco actually does not affect as many parts of the brain. It's very interesting. Now, what do I mean by that? What does that mean to the average person? It means that when you smoke a cigarette, you actually don't lose your memory like you do when you smoke marijuana. It means that when you smoke a tobacco cigarette, you're driving is not impaired. It is with marijuana. It means that even if a child, which we don't, of course we don't want a child to do this, but even if a child would smoke a cigarette and go to school, their attention is actually not changed. Now, again, that's not an argument for, we're not promoting cigarettes, of course not. But it's important to recognize that difference when people say, why are cigarettes legal and marijuana is illegal? Well, first, cigarettes, of course, have a much more of a cultural history. But secondly, they actually affect us in the short term less than in marijuana, especially for young people, especially for the young developing brain. You can't see this very well, but essentially what we think is that marijuana affects 1 in 10 adult users. But if you start using marijuana when you are younger, 16, 15, 14, that number becomes 1 in 6, 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 teenagers who start using marijuana will become addicted to it at some point in their life. And of course, addiction is withdrawal. Addiction is, craving the drug, even when you know you shouldn't. Now, that is less addictive than cocaine or tobacco or heroin, but it's still addictive. And you have a lot of people say, well, it's less addictive than tobacco, so we should legalize it. Well, just because it's less addictive, that's not a reason to legalize. That's a reason to, study it more and see how it does affect all of us. Actually, unlike tobacco also, the use of cannabis, marijuana, is also associated with worse social outcomes later in life. So when researchers look at thousands of marijuana users, you are more likely to be welfare dependent, unemployed, have lower income, and not gone as far in school if you use marijuana. And that's much more than for alcohol and for cigarettes, which is very interesting. Again, because we know marijuana affects our brain and reward, and I think what that tells me is when we think about our future, and when you think about your future as a country, when you think about the workforce that you want to create, the school system, that in the U.S. we're trying to desperately improve our education system because it's fallen behind. How can we improve our education system if we're also legalizing marijuana? It makes absolutely no sense. One of the big issues that people are really talking about and worried about, and we've had many high-profile killings in the United States, in my country, among young people, which is very tragic, in schools and other areas. One of the reasons for that, we think, is what I call the silent epidemic of mental illness. The silent epidemic of mental illness. For too long, we think that if your disease is in your brain, it doesn't count. That only a disease is if you have a heart problem, if you have a leg issue, diabetes. We don't think about if you have a disease in your brain that this is actually a real disease. Well, it is. And mental illness now is the cause of so many problems. When we think about the unfortunate suicide of Robin Williams, when we think about, we could be here for days talking about the people that have succumbed to mental illness. Well, we know that cannabis, marijuana, is a major risk factor, especially if you are predisposed to mental illness. So if you have this genetic disposition, but even if you don't have a genetic disposition, researchers are finding a major connection between heavy marijuana use when you're young and mental illness. You cannot find that connection with alcohol, you cannot find that connection with cocaine, and you cannot find that connection with tobacco. But we're finding it with marijuana today. And I think that's something we really, really need to think about. I started, I'll tell you later, a program with former Congressman Patrick Kennedy called Project SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And Congressman Kennedy is famous for saying that everyone, when they go to the doctor, you should get a checkup from the neck up. So that rhymes in English, probably not in Portuguese. But essentially, you need to check what's going on in here as much as you do what's going on in here. And that's very, very important as we're learning about this. There are many studies. Now, in the United States, we are now experiencing many more emergency room hospital visits due to marijuana than we ever have before. In fact, we have more people in the hospital for marijuana than for heroin or other drugs. Cocaine is still slightly more, and of course alcohol is more because of the raw number of people who use alcohol is so much more than use marijuana or cocaine. But the point is, people think, how can you go to the hospital for marijuana use? Why would that bring anybody Well, again, unlike tobacco and other drugs, the psychosis, the panic attacks are very prevalent. And when I give speeches in the United States about this, I have many parents in the audience who don't understand how this could happen, because many of my parents' generation, they smoked marijuana in, Woodstock or protesting the Vietnam War, etc. Their experience with marijuana is completely different than the experience of young people today, for one major reason. The major reason is the marijuana grown today, and whether it's brought to Brazil or grown or brought to the United States, is 10 to 20 times stronger than the marijuana of my parents' generation. So many politicians, very smart people, they think of marijuana, that doesn't even, it just makes you laugh, maybe, or makes you go to sleep. What else can it do? How, this can't be right. How can it bring people to the emergency room? Well, because the marijuana is fundamentally different. I don't know about in Brazil, but in the United States, we have a movement for organic food and GMO-free food. We don't want genetically modified. It is very ironic that we have many young people saying, I don't want to eat an apple if it's not organic, or if it's genetically modified, I don't want to eat it, but I'll smoke marijuana. Today's marijuana is the most genetically modified plant you could ever imagine. So, you're worried about the environment? You should look at the water supply in California since they started growing marijuana. We're running out of water. Marijuana plants are very thirsty. They require a lot of water. You want to talk about an environmental problem? I think in São Paulo you're having a drought. Yeah. The last thing you want to add to that is marijuana. Because actually for the environment, and I know there's someone from the Green Party here, maybe a few people, from the environmental perspective, we should also be very, very worried, because today's marijuana has grown much stronger than in the past. There are ways to change the growing, there are ways to alter the chemical composition, and the farmers have learned to do that. Of course, it goes without saying that, marijuana is harmful to the lungs, and again, that's why I don't understand some people who say, tobacco is the worst thing, we should prohibit tobacco, it's the most terrible thing. But with marijuana, I don't know, maybe we should be okay with it. If you smoke anything, it's bad for your lungs. I don't care if you try to smoke lettuce. It's going to be bad for your lungs. That's true. And when you have marijuana, which actually has more carcinogens, more cancer-causing compounds than tobacco, we need to think twice before opening the door to this. One of the biggest things, as I mentioned earlier a little bit, is I think the effect on learning and young people, and that's why I'm going to talk about it today. There was the most groundbreaking study conducted last year, 2 years ago, in New Zealand. It looked at over 1,000 people, and it examined their marijuana use. Essentially what it found was that the heavy users of marijuana, teenagers who used marijuana heavily was defined as 3 times a week for 3 years. Okay? By the time they were 38 years old, even if they stopped using marijuana when they were 21, in other words, they were using when they were 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, stopped. Now, 20 years later, age 38 years old, they looked at their IQ, intelligence quotient, right? This is the measurement of intelligence. They looked at that and found that controlling for everything else, including heavy alcohol use, in other words, alcohol didn't matter in this equation, they found that these people at age 38 had a 6 to 8 point reduction in their IQ, intelligent quotient, than the people who did not use marijuana. Does that make sense? And, you know, I have a lot of people saying, well, many famous people, Kevin, are using marijuana, and they're very smart, you know. Many U.S. presidents have used marijuana. The founder of Apple Computers, Steve Jobs, was using marijuana. He's a genius. Okay, well, as I tell many parents and students, I'm sorry to give you the bad news. Not everybody is a genius. So, not everybody is Steve Jobs, Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton, that are so, now, I don't know if they're all geniuses, but you understand what I'm trying to say. They're successful. My point is, not everybody has a superstar IQ. If everybody had 150 IQ, yeah, you could smoke marijuana and you would lose 8 points. That 142 is still pretty good, right? But everybody isn't a genius, unfortunately. And I'm sorry to the parents here who thinks every child is a genius. I'm sorry. The average IQ is 100. When you reduce that 8 points and you have 92, folks, that is the difference between graduating with 1 degree or another. That is the difference between getting a job that you want, getting a job that you just have to get. That is the difference between getting your job promotion and not getting promoted in your job. That's a major issue. And we need to think about as a society and for our youth and our future, what kind of youth and future we want to create. I want to move quickly because we spent a lot of time on that myth. So the second myth, I think, is something important because it's something that I've been hearing a lot also in Colombia and in Brazil also. And that is the issue of medical marijuana. Okay? Marijuana just for medicinal purposes. Now, I will make it very simple. Before I show my slides, I will give you the punchline now. We know that there are probably, okay, most likely, components within the marijuana plant that could have medicinal purposes, okay? Just like in the opium plant, we have medicinal purposes of opium, okay? But we don't ask people to smoke opium to get the effects of morphine, do we? We don't ask people for aspirin, which is your headache. I don't know what it's called here, if it's called aspirin. It's called aspirin, okay. Do you know where aspirin comes from? Aspirin comes from a tree bark of the willow tree. That is aspirin. We don't ask people we don't say, don't have aspirin, go to the tree, take off the bark and chew it, and hopefully you'll feel better. No, we have modern science. Modern science is able to take that, put it in a pill. You know the dosage, you know the side effects, you know where it was grown, you know how it was regulated, you know who sold it to you, you know what the interactions with other drugs are. But right now with marijuana, people are saying you should just smoke marijuana and it's medicine. That doesn't make any sense. Again, most likely marijuana has medicinal properties, but we don't need to smoke it or eat it. We need to look at the components within the plant and scientifically develop them. And if you have cancer or some other debilitating disease and this helps you, great. But right now in the United States, you have people saying, we need to smoke marijuana because of cancer patients. The reality is, in the United States where we have medical marijuana, less than 2% of people who use it have cancer, HIV, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, any of those diseases. It is simply an excuse to smoke marijuana that, I need it for medicinal purposes. Now, there are other medications based on marijuana. One is being studied in Brazil right now called Sativex. There are others as well. I'm sure you have Marinol or a version of it that we have in pharmacies. That's fine. We should develop these. I know there was a case of a parent in Brazil, some parents with a child that had epileptic seizures, epilepsy. Yeah, fine. We should develop this, and science is developing cannabidiol, that's what they're referring to, for the use for those people. I think that's fine. But that is very different than saying we should smoke cannabis for medical purposes. We don't smoke any drug, any other drug. We don't ask you to smoke a medicine. We need to do this in a proper scientific way. I'm going to go forward quickly. There's a big myth, both in Brazil and in the United States, that people are serving prison time and are criminalized for using marijuana. The reality is, even in the United States, with our incarceration rate that is very high, people are not imprisoned for smoking a little marijuana joint, and I don't think they're imprisoned here for that either. That is a big myth and justification that people use to legalize. They say, we don't want people in jail, we must legalize marijuana. Well, no. People aren't in jail, in prison, for just smoking a joint. Am I wrong? And even if they were, the answer is not legalization. We can have better, smarter answers, and I'll get to that later. The main purpose, as you probably can guess from my talk earlier, is this myth here, myth 4, that people say, because alcohol and tobacco are legal, marijuana should be too, they say. And I think that is very, very, very wrong-headed and misguided. And mainly for these reasons. First of all, I already talked about this. The use levels for alcohol and tobacco are much higher than for marijuana. I already mentioned that. But this I also want you to focus on. When you legalize a substance, my friends, you are starting an industry. I don't care if you restrict their advertising or not. You're still starting a legal, commercial industry which promotes addiction. Okay? I was telling Father Ram earlier, this is what we call addiction for profit. That is what it is. Because these companies who want to legalize marijuana and are putting a lot of money in Brazil to lobby for this, they're doing this for one reason only. They're not doing it because they want to use marijuana, or they want civil rights, or they care about liberty, or they care about justice, or they care about, no. One reason, money, money, money. Repeat that again, money, money, money. Because people see, well, we can legalize drugs and make a lot of money. And remember, the alcohol and tobacco industries, both in Brazil and in the United States, they do not make money off of the casual user, okay? If you enjoy a glass of wine with dinner, with your wonderful steak, Brazilian steak that I had last night, which was excellent, if you have your wine with dinner, you are not an important person in the eyes of the alcohol industry. I'm very sorry to tell you that. You're a very unimportant person if you just drink a glass of wine with dinner. You're just not important. Who is important to the alcohol industry? It's very simple. It's the small percentage of people who drink very heavily. We were talking about this yesterday. This is what we call in public policy Pareto's principle. What is Pareto's principle? Pareto's principle is that in this situation, 20% of the entire population of drinkers will consume 80% of the amount of alcohol. Is that right? I mean, the people who work in treatment here, same thing. What does that mean? The flip side is that most people who drink, they drink 20% of all the alcohol. 80% of people share 20% of the alcohol among the. So if you have 10 bottles of wine that represent all the alcohol consumption in Brazil, 2 of those bottles are shared by 8 people. That means that 8 of those bottles are shared by 2 people. Okay? And that's where you make money in this industry. Now, okay, so let's think about that. You have to increase addiction in order to make money. Okay. Raise your hand here if anybody knows somebody who is an addict who started using drugs or alcohol when they were an adult. Raise your hand if you know somebody who started using drugs and alcohol after age 30. 1, 2, about 5 people. Now raise your hand if you know somebody who is an addict who started using drugs or alcohol before age 30. Okay. Right. How about before age 20? Yeah, all the same, right. What does that mean? That means that you better target kids if you want to make money. So I have to listen to nonsense in the United States of people in marijuana legalization world. This is not, we don't want kids to use marijuana. No. This is only for the responsible adults to use marijuana in their own home, and they won't be a criminal. Isn't that right? Isn't that good? Well, but that's not what it's about at all. Otherwise, there would be no campaign to legalize marijuana, because you're not going to make money off of, if my parents, who are now 70, my dad turned 75 yesterday, if he's going to smoke marijuana, which he won't, but if he would, that's not an important person that's not who the alcohol industry would like to target, or the marijuana industry would like to target. The marijuana industry wants to target my younger cousins. Why did you have cartoons here? Just until you banned them. Why before cartoons promoting cigarettes? Was it because adults like to watch cartoons? Raise your hand if you watch cartoons. And you're all adults here. Anybody watch cartoons? Okay, a few of you do. But those are the young ones. Cartoons target young people. There's a reason why it's called brain marketing. In other words, you market to the brain that you're trying to reach. And the reason you have cartoons is because young people like cartoons, and you market to them. This, my friends, is what I'm worried about with legalization. I could really care less of a 60-year-old guy wants to smoke a joint in his basement of his house once a week after work. I don't think he should, but that's not who I'm worried about. Their brain is developed. I'm worried about, first of all, the message that sends to young people, but I'm worried about the targeting of young people by this new industry. And that is what we're seeing in the United States right now. So this is what I'm worried about, right? I'm worried about the Marlboro of marijuana. This is what I'm worried about, the packaging. And right now we have, this is in Colorado, we have packaging of marijuana cigarettes now. Let me tell you, they are taking their cues from the playbook of the tobacco industry. So the question for legalization campaigners is, do you like the tobacco industry? Because if you do, you should be in favor of legalization, because that's what it will be. We're seeing yeah, that's right. The Nutella infused with marijuana. Now, people think, well, how bad can it be? It's just, it's going to be with chocolate and... When you ingest marijuana, actually, it hits you faster and stronger than if you were to smoke it. Smoking brings it to your brain faster, but when you eat it in one dose, it will hit you harder. It is more potent even than smoking. And now in Colorado, it says if you show your ski pass, right, the badge that allows you to go skiing, you can get a joint of marijuana for $1. I don't know about you, but I'm not a very good skier, so the last thing I need is to be around other skiers who are smoking marijuana. I'm not going to be going to Colorado anytime soon. I need all the help I can get. But the point is, these are the sodas now. These are the ice cream bars. These are the cartoons. Folks, this is the future of legalization. It's not about a little joint that you're going to pass around with your friends. Who cares about that? It is about creating novel products to target young people. Right now, the third largest international tobacco company, Japan Tobacco International, has invested in a vaporizer that allows you to either use tobacco or marijuana. You put the vapor, the liquid, the vapor in this cartridge. It's electronic. You can actually charge it in your laptop with a USB. I'm not kidding. And it has no smell. You don't know what it is. I have a feeling the 8th graders and 15-year-olds are going to be going to school with these now because nobody will be able to detect them using this. But folks, this is the third largest tobacco company in the world that is now investing in marijuana. We shouldn't be surprised. Folks, the tobacco industry lied to your country for 80 years about the effects of smoking. They lied to the United States for 100 years about the effects of smoking. In the United States, when the tobacco executives were brought before Congress, as recently as 1999, they told Congress in the U.S., no, tobacco is not addictive and we don't think it causes lung cancer. We want to start that again? We're going to trust them again? We have to think through this in a much stronger way. We now have concentrates. These are the waxes. I'm going to show you a picture later that are close to 100% THC. It's unbelievable because you cannot smoke a joint more than 40% THC. You cannot. Scientifically, you cannot create a cigarette that has more than 40% THC. And 40% THC is, I don't know if you have that here. I mean, it's off the charts. You have to go to Canada. It's hard to find. Now you can get 100% THC in a wax, in an oil and a wax that are being sold legally. You now have Groupon selling these vaporizers that look like pens. They look like pencils. And you put your marijuana in there. These are the products that a new industry is starting. And so what I'm worried about is the intersection, of Wall Street, which is the street of, all the U.S. financial markets in the United States. The intersection of marijuana to Wall Street with these investors. Okay? Because what we're learning in the United States, and I promise it will come to Brazil, is that legalization is not about the hippies with the, protesting or wearing a hemp necklace or something. No. It's about guys that look like me with suits, with their Harvard Masters of Business Administration in their hand, and their billion-dollar playbook to become the next tobacco executive. That's what it's about, folks. It is not about getting rid of the black market no, it's about making money. So they're investing. This is the Fortune magazine, Marijuana Incorporated. There are now vending machines all over Colorado. I don't know if you ever had tobacco vending machines here in Brazil, but in the United States we did, and we made them unlawful. Now we have marijuana vending machines. I'm going to skip this a little bit. Now, people say, and this is very important because I know, given where we are in South America, people say, well, Kevin, we need to do what Uruguay is doing because we must get rid of the gangs, the black market, the traffickers, the big producers. And if we legalize marijuana, we will do that. Well, unfortunately, we won't get rid of the black market. Why? Because marijuana is not the only source of their revenue. Do we think that the drug dealer, the drug, kingpins are going to say, "Oh, you legalized marijuana? Okay, we're going to go home and sell ice cream"? No. They are going to sell. First of all, they're going to keep selling marijuana and undercut the legal price. They are still going to sell to kids because remember, even in Uruguay, it is not legal for a 12-year-old to buy marijuana. Where is the 12-year-old going to get marijuana from? The same place they got it from before, the black market. Now, by the way, it's also not legal to sell to tourists. There are a lot of people in Uruguay who are tourists. Where are they going to get it from? The black market. And we know actually that these are not marijuana trafficking organizations. They're transnational criminal groups, meaning they deal also with cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, human trafficking, internet crimes, identity theft, kidnapping, murder. Do we think those people are going to say, oh, we're done because, you legalized marijuana, goodbye? No. They're going to get stronger because the demand is going to go up when you legalize. They will undercut the legal price. In Colorado today, the legal price of marijuana is twice as much as the illegal price. And government officials are saying, why we're not making much tax revenue? Why? Well, because people are going to the black market. They continue to go to the black market because it is cheaper. And so in the United States, we're not making money, not only not making money from marijuana, we don't make much money from alcohol and tobacco either. I don't know what the statistics are in Brazil, but in the United States, for every $1 the government makes on taxes from tobacco and alcohol, it costs the U.S. government $10 in social costs. What does that mean? It means that because they cause so many problems and we have to pay healthcare system, education system, criminal justice system. By the way, just because a drug is illegal, it doesn't mean that you don't have criminal justice involvement and law enforcement. It means you actually have more law enforcement. Law enforcement, the number one drug for law enforcement is alcohol. That's legal. You're going to have the same thing with marijuana and other drugs. So we don't make any money in the U.S. by legalizing alcohol and tobacco. And by the way, if you like to gamble, we don't make any money from gambling either. Atlantic City is basically bankrupt. Atlantic City is like a city in the United States on the East Coast that is known for gambling. It's almost bankrupt. All the hotels are closing. It's not good for a community. A big myth is that Portugal and Holland have successfully legalized drugs. Well, first of all, neither country has legalized any drug. So it's a big myth. But in Portugal, they have a special program. It's very detailed. I'm not going to get into the details. But essentially, they put them in front of a panel of social workers, and then they give them treatment or whatever. And they've had mixed results. Actually, in Portugal, drug use among young people is up. Deaths from HIV are down. They have mixed results. It's difficult to tie the policy, I think, to an outcome. We don't know. In the Netherlands, if you've been to Holland lately, you see they're closing down their marijuana stores. They're actually shutting many of them down. They've shut hundreds down, actually. The government has shut hundreds down. Why? Because it's not good for a community. I mean, show me a community that benefits when there's a liquor store on the corner. When you have a store that sells alcohol, is that good even for the community? No. And when you have a store that sells marijuana, is that good for the safety of a community? No. And if you want to talk about social justice, folks, I will just give you one story from the United States. In the United States, I don't know what it is like in Brazil, we have 8 times as many liquor stores in the poor neighborhoods than in the rich neighborhoods. I don't know if it's the same thing here. Maybe not. It is. Some people are saying yes. Okay. Why? Because these industries target the most vulnerable among us. You are more likely to be addicted if you don't have an education. You are more likely to be addicted if you don't have alternative activities. You are more likely to be addicted if you don't have stable housing. You are more likely to be addicted if you don't have access to health care. Well, then if you're trying to make money, you want to focus on the people who are going to more likely come back to you. And so when people talk about the social justice of the drug war, I want to talk about the social justice of our legal drugs, already legal drugs. The legality of alcohol and tobacco don't promote social justice. Why would the legality of marijuana promote social justice? And I'm not going to get into this because we don't have time, but the final myth is that prevention, intervention, and treatment are doomed to fail, so why even try? We need to, invest in all kinds of wraparound services. I'm just a foreign observer. I realize that, so I may be speaking out of place. But when I went to the Krakow yesterday and saw some of the hotels there that were now being used by the drug traffickers, it's okay if I say this story? The amount of money being used to supplement the lifestyle of drug traffickers? And, by the way, many of the Metropolitan Police who are just standing there watching everybody use drugs. What if we took half of that money, not all of it, half, and created a recovery house, a stable living environment for the people that want to live in a drug-free environment? Why don't we try that, at least, before trying to legalize drugs? Let's try that. Maybe we could even offer them job opportunities and training. Maybe we could offer them health care and education. And there is already the clinic down there, and whose director is here, that we visited that's doing wonderful work. Well, what if we expanded that and offered stable housing? What do you think? I think that would be probably maybe better than funding a lifestyle of drug traffickers to live in former hotels. We can think about a lot of more interesting things to do. And let me tell you, folks, they're harder, though. They are harder. They're more complicated than just saying legalization. That's very easy. You know, people ask me, well, you learned about public policy. What's the test, the technical test of a good policy? And I have a very simple answer. The answer is, if your policy fits on a bumper sticker, it's probably not a good policy. Legalization is a soundbite. It'll get you in the news. It makes you relevant again. It gives you a platform. It's not a policy, though. It's not a thought-out conclusion to a very difficult, complex problem. We think if we legalize drugs, people all of a sudden are going to be out of poverty. There are complex issues going on, and anything that is so simplistic is not going to work. You know, I just want to give you a few minutes before I end. I know I have to finish soon. About, you know, how did we get here? In the United States, we've had changing laws that have been more lenient towards marijuana. And I have a very simple, there actually is a very simple answer to this, and I hope you can all learn. Maybe I have 3 minutes? It's okay. 40 years ago, they brought the issue of medical marijuana to the United States. And they said, we will use medical marijuana as a red herring to give marijuana a good name. Okay, what does that mean? It means that they took the stereotype of the marijuana user. They changed the stereotype in the minds of Americans from a lazy young guy that nobody cares about, or a lazy hippie or something, to an 85-year-old grandmother with cancer. That was the new face of marijuana, because they said she needs medical marijuana. That's how it started in the U.S. Why have we legalized in Colorado and Washington? It started because of medical marijuana. So I just say that as a warning to you. It doesn't mean we shouldn't research it. We should research it. But they didn't want to research it. They just wanted to give joints away if you had a headache. That's how it started in the United States. And the money, you can't see the slide, but the amount of money that has been spent, almost $200 million in the last 30 years in the United States by a few billionaires to legalize marijuana. And that is why a lot of the success is there. Now, I'm going to just spend the last few minutes on Colorado and Washington. Many of you know we've started the Legalize in Colorado and Washington. The bottom line is that the results have not been pretty. First of all, Colorado did not legalize marijuana overnight. It was a process over several years. So the first stores actually opened about 6 years ago under medical, because anybody could go to a store. I mean, if you were alive, you could get a marijuana card. You didn't need to be having cancer, okay? And so they started 6 years ago with the stores of marijuana stores. And this is what it looks like. You should go, if you haven't been to Colorado, you should go and see. Look at, these are the displays, the gummy bears, the candies, the cookies, the brownies. These are the displays of the marijuana stores today. Here are some of the stores. This is an internet site that will tell you every store of marijuana in your neighborhood. You just You just open your iPhone and it tells you based on where you are. And they're making hundreds of millions of dollars, by the way. The New York Times had a very good story. Snacks laced with marijuana raise concerns because these are candies that are targeted for kids, and kids see them on the table and they eat them. They end up spending the night in the emergency room. And they are advertising. The marijuana lobby is advertising. They say a safer choice is legal. Marijuana is safer than beer. Kids should use anybody should use marijuana. They say they don't want kids to use it, but they say marijuana is safer than beer. And so, these are the guys that, look more like me that are making the money and hundreds of millions of dollars off of marijuana, and there are many more. This is just some example. They have magazines that benefit from tourism. They have coupons. These are all coupons for different marijuana products. The newspaper, on the front page of the main newspaper, advertises for marijuana in Colorado. So now you have the media making money off of marijuana too. You wonder why we don't have a lot of good news stories about marijuana? Huh. They're making too much money off of it. Why would they want to make marijuana look bad? And the results have not been good. First of all, the source of marijuana is oftentimes, for kids, someone's medical marijuana. So kids are getting medical marijuana. The states with medical marijuana have more dependents than the states without. And I'm going through this data very quickly, but I will have this available on the website for everybody afterwards. The driving, fatal car crashes with marijuana started increasing when Colorado started selling marijuana. The car crashes. In fact, the traffic fatalities from marijuana have more than doubled, almost tripled in Colorado. The youth use of marijuana has gone up much more than the national level in Colorado. I mean, we could go through all these slides, but on and on. Treatment, prevention, schools, they have all seen increased problems in Colorado because of what's happened. I mean, there's a lot of information here we'll have available for everybody. Oh, this is very interesting. All of the car crashes have fallen, total crashes have fallen in Colorado, except for marijuana. Only marijuana has gone up since they started selling in stores. Hospitals are seeing many people now with a marijuana diagnosis because of a panic attack from eating something. I put the marijuana product next to the real product so you could see how similar it is. And we are tracking the activities, the money. They have not made the money they thought they were going to make. They made $35 million. They thought they were going to make $120 million. So they haven't even made money off of it, the government. And there has been 2 major deaths linked to recreational marijuana use. One was an African student, exchange student, came to Colorado to use marijuana. He ate a marijuana candy bar. He fell off a balcony and died. And the legalization people say, oh, he ate all of the candy bar. He was only supposed to have 1/16 of the candy bar. I don't know about you, but if I see a candy bar, I'm eating the whole thing. I'm not eating 1/16. Okay, but that was their response. This is the same response we've heard from the tobacco industry for so many years, not having responsibility. And then they say, no, marijuana didn't kill him. Just he fell. That's why he died. Well, why did he fall? He fell because he ate a marijuana candy. If you does anybody die of a tobacco overdose? No. You die of lung cancer caused by tobacco. So he died of a fall caused by marijuana. It's the same thing. And so people say nobody's ever died from marijuana. Many people have, from suicide, crashes and driving. this was an accident. This poor child fell. He was 19 years old. Another woman died 2 months ago on the phone calling the police while her husband, who had just had a marijuana cookie, killed her. He was having a hallucination panic attack. He didn't know who she was. He killed her while she was talking to police for help. And people say marijuana doesn't kill. The drug dealers in Colorado are having a ball. They're having a blast, as we would say in America. They're loving what's going on. Because the police don't focus on marijuana. They can sell marijuana to people for cheaper than the government, and they're thriving. Overall in Colorado, tax revenue is lower, there's higher drug use, and these companies and lobbying groups are very, very, very strong. We have created a new industry in Colorado. So my final slide, we started a group called SAM with Patrick Kennedy and many other people to try and really raise awareness about this issue, to stop this next industry from starting. And we have a lot of information on our website. Here, we have a lot of information on our website. If you would like to email me for a copy of the presentation, please do. But I just want to show you one last slide. Let's remember, and I know it was the same in Brazil, in what our experience, again, with tobacco. In the 1960s, we had advertisements that said, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Remember that? You had it here too, right? Okay. This was despite the fact that the health groups were saying it was a health hazard, that this was not right. But the industry kept going. We are repeating the same thing in the United States with legal marijuana. We have an industry that says it's safe. Look, it's a candy bar. It's a breakfast food. Even though our health authorities are very, very worried. And so the question I will leave you with is this question. Who will we listen to this time? Will we listen to the tobacco industry until we have so many deaths that finally some courageous politicians, many of whom are here, stood up and said, enough, we will go back? Or will we listen to the science, and will we remember our history and not repeat the same mistakes of the past? So thank you very much for listening to me. You can go to my website and email. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you.